welcome to America Tonight. I'm Marisa Giorgio in Missoula, Montana. Closing arguments in former President Donald Trump's hush money trial have just ended. Trump struck a triumphant pose outside a Manhattan courtroom today as he headed into court. But that was about 10 hours ago. Closing arguments wrapped just minutes before this broadcast. Inside the courtroom today, Trump's defense attorneys, we're taking a live look there. Trump's defense attorneys attacked the credibility of key witness Michael Cohen, who claims to have paid adult film star Stormy Daniels $130,000 on behalf of Trump to keep her quiet about an alleged affair in 2016. And though Trump has denied having an affair with Daniels or making a hush money payment, prosecutors fired back, claiming phone logs prove Cohen and Trump spoke by phone shortly before the wire transfer and that the evidence is, quote, damning. Former President Trump wasn't impressed by the action. In fact, he took to Truth Social during a court break to share his one-word review of today's proceedings, quote, boring. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, surrogates for both the Trump and Biden campaigns traded some definitely not boring barbs. Trump campaign senior advisor Jason Miller suggesting the Biden campaign is, quote, in the toilet, and actor Robert De Niro slamming Trump as a, quote, buffoon.
Last week, President Trump spoke in the Bronx, where he had over 25,000 people show up to rally around him. And the best the Biden campaign could do was put out a web video with Robert De Niro. There is nothing behind the Biden campaign. Their numbers are in the toilet.
When Trump ran in 2016, it was like a joke. This buffoon running for president. No, never could happen. We don't want to wake up after the election saying, what, again? My God, what the hell have we done?
And Capitol Police officers there standing behind Mr. De Niro. All of this playing out with a jury verdict as close as 1 day away. Now, keep in mind, the outcome of this trial might not be as simple as guilty or not guilty. The former president could be convicted on all 34 counts of falsification of business records, or he could be convicted on some counts and not others. Of course, he could also be acquitted. Or if jurors cannot reach a unanimous verdict, this could end in a hung jury and mistrial. So joining us now to talk about all the ways this could play out is federal defense attorney and legal analyst Ronald Chapman. Ronald, jurors already got some guidance from the judge. It's been a much longer day in court for them than was anticipated. So what does that say about the possibility of a quick verdict here?
Long day in court, certainly a long enough day for Donald Trump to think that it was quite a boring day of closing arguments here. But here's what we can expect from the jury. Obviously, they'll get released. We'll get instructions tomorrow. And then likely they're going to take some time to assess all of these counts. There's a lot to go through and start picking through the evidence. A lot of people don't realize, but this is the first time the jury will have the opportunity to actually discuss the facts of the case if they've been following the judge's instructions. So they have no idea where their counterparts lie, and they're going to take a measure of the distance between everybody. A lot are expecting a verdict by Friday. It's really hard to tell with a case like this. Obviously, we've got the trial of a former president here and a lot to go through.
I think you make an interesting point about the jury really having the first time to talk this out and see where everybody else is standing and what they've heard. Once in deliberation, what are some of the other rules? Walk us through what jurors can ask for, what they have to rely on their memory and their notes for, how that plays out. What are the rules there?
Typically, the jury doesn't get a readback of the transcript. That's often one of the early questions I'll get from a jury. I have heard some people say that in New York it might be a bit different here, but if that's the case, it may be only related to specific portions of the transcript. But the jury will communicate to the court using notes and a foreperson that would likely be voted. And those notes will be read in open court, and answers to questions will be provided to the jury. If they are deadlocked, oftentimes they send a note saying that they're having difficulty reaching a decision. They're often told not to give the court the count of where the decision is, so we won't have an idea of where that lies. There could be something called an Allen charge given, which is the judge instructing them to go back there and do their best to make a decision. That's never something the defendant wants to happen.
But we've been at this for weeks, and you talk about, this being the first time they're really able to talk if they're following the rules about what's going on. So based on what you've seen play out here, how long could it be if they're going through everything and hashing through everything that we've seen?
And this is the really difficult question. Obviously, if everybody gets back there and their minds are all made up, there may be a quick verdict. A lot of defense attorneys will say a quick verdict usually means acquittal. Oftentimes, that's a good thing for the defense because of the beyond a reasonable doubt standard that we require in criminal court. It's much harder to sit back and sift through evidence to see if we can find somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In my experience, juries will go through the counts one by one. In this case, that may not be necessary because the same theory applies to every single count. There were some big victories for the prosecution here. The jury instructions only required the prosecution to argue for some underlying offense. And what I mean by that is they didn't have to specifically outline what additional felony they are arguing Donald Trump committed. That is likely to be an appellate issue. In fact, I believe that's likely to be a reversible issue on appeal. But that does make the jury's job a lot easier because they won't have to figure out what felony they think Donald Trump intended to cover up by allegedly falsifying these records.
Yeah, a very good thing to remember here that no matter what happens with a verdict, there's always that appeals process. Let's talk about the weight the jury carries here as they go into deliberation. How much does the enormity of a case like this affect those individual jurors who are going into that room?
Yeah, I think one of the most public trials that I would always revert back to in this scenario is going to be the O.J. Simpson case. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you're old enough, you saw it on TV. We all saw the verdict happen. I think I was in middle school when the verdict was broadcast live into my classroom. So it's a trial that I've certainly kept my eye on when dealing with these situations. And the way that jury handled the enormity of the decision that they had to make, an entire city and maybe even an entire country kind of on their shoulders as they're deciding the fate of this one man, you start to recognize that the jury grows closer because they only understand how each other are going through this and feeling through this process. And they really don't pay much attention to what's going on in the outside world. They know they have the facts. They know they all saw it and their job was to listen, and they will make the decision that they feel is appropriate. I do believe in the jury system and that independence that a jury will start to feel when they are not caught up in the press cycle and they can sit in the box and listen to the evidence and make the best decision possible. I really don't expect a lot of politics in that jury room. I expect people to vote their heart and their conscience.
You bring up OJ. I mean, I certainly remember watching that trial, watching the verdict. The big difference here, though, is there were cameras in the courtroom. How has that affected this process, and how do you think not having cameras in the courtroom will affect the jury's decision here?
Hey, and maybe even on this network, I gave a different answer before. I would have said that I don't want cameras in the courtroom at all. As a federal defense attorney, primarily, I don't get the benefit of cameras in federal court. And that's been nice because my juries and my witnesses don't have the pressure associated with the press cycle. This case is a bit different, though. We have a lot of misinformation coming out of the trial. We've got summaries of testimony, predominantly from the social media feeds of those who are inside the courtroom. And then we have everybody clambering to microphones to try to spin what happened in court for their own side. And you could have two very different views of what happened during this trial based on what network you might have listened to or which X feed you happen to look at. That's the problem with the lack of cameras in the courtroom. The people, the individual people in the public don't have the ability to make up their minds. I think that the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trials are a really good example of that. People were very well informed about what happened in that courtroom, and I think it's a benefit for the public and likely also for the press.
Excellent point. Lots of spin happening, certainly. Federal defense attorney and legal analyst Ronald Chapman, thank you so much for your time and expertise tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.